Okay, so welcome everyone to tonight's webinar on Multifamily 101. The goal of tonight's meeting is really just to give you a look behind the curtain and take out all the mystery behind purchasing multifamily assets and why you see one on almost every corner across America. So before I introduce myself, how many of you, let me just see a show of hands, how many of you have noticed that multifamily buildings are being erected everywhere across the US? Does everybody see that? Brand new builds? Yeah. So as I was trying to just figure out, why do you see so many? I mean, I've been in this space for quite a while, but I got to thinking about it. I believe the reason why we see so many popping up everywhere is, one, they're very lucrative. They're a great investment vehicle. But number two, it's a way for the government to put a lot of people on a small square footage of land. So imagine you have 100 families living on 20 acres, or you can build 100 single family homes, but are they all going to be within that same geographical area that the county gets revenue from? We've obviously seen suburban crawl, and I think that it's just a great way to keep revenue centralized to a small area. And it also benefits the retailers in the area. Instead of having 100 homes spread out, it's very easy to attract a lot of tenants or a lot of revenue to one geographical area by keeping them in a small square footage. And then the second, I don't think the next generation can afford a single family home. Like, it's become unaffordable for a lot of people. And a lot of people are now traveling and they'd rather their dollars go towards that rather than investing in a home. So I can tell you it is profitable to be an investor in multifamily. And so tonight we're going to take a look at, I'm going to share the stage with my co-host, Debbie Conti. She is here with me tonight. And again, we're going to do a deep dive into this. And at the end, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask us. But if you'll reserve them to the very end, I'm sure we're probably going to cover the majority of things that are kind of peaked in your mind, but we'll have a chance to address those. So without further ado, my name, for those of you that don't know me, I am Jennifer Barner. I have been investing in real estate for the last 9 years, and I got my start when somebody just invited me to a Rich Dad conference. I had no idea what Rich Dad was all about, had never read the book. And if you haven't read the Rich Dad book, I would encourage you. It's a must read. It really shows you how you can achieve financial freedom. And it gives you ideas on how you can get that back in your life through real estate. So I started back in 2015 buying single family homes with the goal of not having to go back to work once my kids were approaching college. So I have 4 children, and I knew because of 2008 when the stock market crashed that we didn't have the income or the funds set aside to put all of our kids through college debt free. So when I had heard that you can use your IRA to invest in single family homes and multifamily properties, and real estate in general, that was a game changer for our family. So my husband invested in me and my education, and I went through the program, and here I am 9 years later, and I am now the proud owner of, I've invested in over 22,104 doors. I'm also the general partner on 890. We recently sold a property that was a big multifamily asset, and I've flipped 45 homes. So I'm just really excited that this has really provided a way for our family to achieve financial freedom. So now I work because I desire to impact our family, our kids' lives, and leave a legacy. So I now have a podcast called Mastering Money for Moms, where I'm teaching others how to achieve financial freedom and doing some coaching on the side in this area as well. But without further ado, I want to turn it over to Debbie. So Debbie, take it away.
Hey, thanks, Jennifer. Well, first, I just want to say I'm completely honored that I get to sit next to you on this. And I apologize to everyone for my voice if I'm like yelling at you. But my journey's a little bit different. I've been in corporate America for almost 30 years, so quite some time. And my husband and I have always tried to do all the right things, just invest as much as possible in our 401ks and save and do all of that. And then a few years ago, we were looking at stuff and he just made a comment in passing like, wow, do you realize how much we lost in the stock market this year? And I had always had an interest in real estate. And then when so I started to research it more. Okay, do I want to buy single families? Do I want to buy like a small multifamily, like a duplex? Which ultimately led me to larger multifamily. And for me, it's really about diversification. I still do the 401k. We still do stock investing. We still do all of that. But it's just another way for us to build wealth, have passive income. So I just really like that for us and for our family. My goal is ultimately not to tap into our 401k and all of that someday, and just be able to, retire on our real estate. So, yeah. Okay. I will go ahead really quick. There's a lot going on in this agenda. We're covering a ton. As Jennifer and I were talking about it, we're like, oh my word, there's a lot here. But essentially, we're just going to peel back that curtain, explain multifamily, why we think multifamily investing is passive investing right for you. Then we're kind of going to look at the metrics of it, give some examples, talk about things that are important in this space: market analysis, asset analysis, syndication team analysis, and then kind of go through what does it look like to invest and how do you do that? And then what's the process of going through, like once you're in something, what happens then? And then, like Jennifer had mentioned, at the end, if you just hold on to your questions, I'm hoping we answer it, but if we don't, then at the end, we can definitely tackle those. So, okay. So just a quick, definition. So multifamily syndication, and that's obviously syndication sounds like, a big word or whatever. It's just where people pool their resources, their money, to buy a multifamily asset. And then essentially what happens is once you're in that and you have an equity stake, the investors receive distributions based on the percentage that you own. So I'll go through an example of one that I have in a little bit here. And in that one, I think I own 1.01%. It's not much, but it's something. So, but anyway, just to share that. To give you the lay of the land with the syndication structure, there's two groups of people within a syndication structure. A limited partner who's passive. So they've contributed their money. They don't have to do anything else except look at the financial reports that they get their distributions. They're not involved in managing the asset at all. And they're not responsible if anything happens with that asset. That is all handled by the general partners. What's nice about this is you really are like setting it and forgetting it. It's set up, and then from there, you're not worrying about it. On the other hand, the general partners, which you'll hear terms, general partners, syndicators, operators, they're the ones that are doing all the work. They're the ones that are managing that asset. They're responsible for it to make sure that everything's in place, that they're handling, the banking aspects properly with the loan, insurance, all of that sort of stuff, managing the tenants, all of that. They're handling all of that. So two distinct roles. Okay, why multifamily? First, and what kind of Jennifer was mentioning earlier is, first, there's a need for housing. There's, everyone needs a home, needs a place to live. So we've got that people need space and people need to rent. So as far as people, what you want to make sure is that people want to be in that asset, want to be in that apartment that you're looking at. And there's a lot that goes into that, and we'll explain that. But it's a necessity. Second is that it has a steady cash flow. So if, for example, when I mentioned earlier, I was looking at buying a duplex, I could have a duplex and let's say one tenant left. Well, now I'm at 50% of my revenue. But if I own 120 unit, I lose a tenant. That's under 1%. So there, it's steady, and you don't miss if like you're missing a tenant. It doesn't affect the bottom line as much as if you had a duplex and then half of your revenue is gone. Kind of along that same vein is economies of scale. So when you've got a big apartment complex, more than likely you have property management and maintenance right there, and they're taking care of all of that. So they're going to have all of the parts right there to fix all this stuff. As opposed to if I had, 5 single family homes, I might have to go, stop to Home Depot, then go to the homes, and then, go all around. Everything is right there in one location, so you do get the economies of scale. Appreciation potential. And this is something that we really look at when you're evaluating an asset. Is there market demand for it? Will the rent increase naturally? But then also, and Jennifer will go through an example later on, where can we add improvements to value add to improve that the appreciation part of it? And in multifamily, in this space, it's all based on the net operating income for the value of the property. It's not based on comps like we have in residential. So that's just an interesting little thing when you look at those numbers. So risk diversification, again, kind of like with the steady cash flow, you've got tenants, you've got a lot of tenants over, that, like if we lose 1 or 2, you can pick it back up and you can just fill that. It's not as big as impact. And then the last one, and I'm sure everyone has seen this lately with inflation, generally it helps hedge against inflation with this, because rents generally increase along with inflation. And you see that. I know in some instances, rents have really gone higher in some markets. So yeah. Sorry, this is temperamental on me. There we go. Okay. So could it be right for you? This is what I came up with for why it was right for me. Initially, when I first started, it's hands off. I had wired my money and then watched distributions and all that come in. And I didn't do anything. I did, though, start spending a lot more time paying attention to real estate and really starting to learn and wanted to dig in further. So, and now I love it, but that's just an interesting, that's like a side note. There are potential high returns. If you've got a good syndication team, they can help maximize that profit. They can look and say, okay, you know what, if we make these improvements, we think we could put the rent here, or, if we, do whatever, make the property more appealing. We think we can, help with the property management and reduce some of those expenses. So yeah, there's the potential for that, depending on, the situation of the deal and that team. The other thing is with taxes. So when you get revenue and distributions, there also will be, they'll do an accelerated depreciation typically. And so you'll be able to take that accelerated depreciation and offset it against those distributions. So that's a nice little piece too. Again, talking about that expertise of the team, you're working with people who are professional property managers and a syndication team. So they have experience, knowledge, they have a track record in here. And I would just say to anyone, if you look at any deal in the future, I'd really pay attention to that syndication team. I'm sure Jennifer has some thoughts there, but it's really interesting, and that can really make it that team, and who's managing it. So, and the last thing is limited liability. I I didn't have to worry about, oh, is there an accident on site? Is there this? I'm not liable for anything that would happen at that property. So again, just kind of passively investing and getting that distribution. So to go through some terms, metrics. So typically, if you've seen deals before, or if you've this may be all new to you, but they always manage these deals and look at these metrics. We look at these metrics. So the first one and the bottom numbers are just general guidelines, just to give you a feel. So the first average annual return is just the return averaged. Oh, the yearly average. It's just all those numbers are just averaged together. The equity multiple, that's essentially how much money am I going to get out based on what I put in. So for example, if let's just use the first number there of 1.8, if I put in $100,000, I would expect to get 180,000 back within that whole period time. Hold times are typically 3 to 7 years. It depends on, typically you'll see the plans, okay, we plan on holding this 5 years, but can get into other things of whether or not we sell earlier or later. And I think Jennifer's example later on, she's going to show that they exited sooner and gave their investors back their money earlier. Cash on cash. So this is the actual money that you get on an annual basis for that original cash investment. So for example, if again, like in that, using that first number, if I gave $100,000, I would expect, and I would get a 7% cash on cash. That means I'm getting $7,000 that year. And the last one for all of our finance folks, this is your full return. This is all of your distributions and all the proceeds from the sale or the refi back to you. But then it also considers time value of money, if you remember that fun term. So you'll see these a lot. That's these are very common, and you'll see all of those. Okay. So I wanted to go over, this is actually one of my investments, the pro forma numbers. So I wanted to show this to you. So in this one, it was $100,000. I would expect over the life of it, over the 5 years, to get $46,000 in distributions. And then at the time of the sale of the refi, get 55 back. So essentially what's going to happen, if in the 5 years, if all goes as planned, that $100,000 should turn into $201,000. Just to call out a few little nuances, if you notice that the cash flow here varies by the year, typically in your first year, that's like a stabilization period. But in this example, it was an 8% preferred return, meaning that I'm guaranteed an 8% preferred return. And if I don't get that in a year, it will be made up at a later date. So essentially what the in this deal, I'm not quite hitting that in the first year with the preferred return because of stabilizing the asset and all of that. So, but then you can notice in the second year, it's a little bit, it's higher to make up for that not hitting the preferred return in year one. So this is just a quick example of something that I'm in. And it's fun to watch. I just to say because I am kind of a nerd, when I get my distributions, I actually keep a spreadsheet to track it against these, just because I'm curious and want to follow through, see what it's like. So, okay. Market and asset analysis. So here, what's important, there's a few things that are very important. We'll get to that in a little bit. But whenever you're looking, so for us looking for deals and properties that we're interested in, and we can go and look and explore many deals, and not all of them work out. But what we do is for markets, we're looking at, is this area growing in population? Is it growing in income? Is it growing in jobs? Looking at all of that, because you wouldn't want to get into a market where you don't have the demand and you're not fully rented. Looking at that. Ideally, you want at least to be in an area that has a population of 100,000. So, just depending on the different area, because again, you want to make sure that you have people that can fill that apartment. You want to have a diverse employment base. So here, for example, it'd be, what is there? Others are hospital like healthcare. Are there large corporations? Is there government? Is there education? So that if one employer left, you're not stuck that, oh no, like for example, sometimes in cities where there's, let's say a military base or something, what happens if that military base left? Would you lose a lot of that population? So you really want to make sure that you've got a good pool there. The other very important thing here with the area is, does the area income support that rent? So as you're looking at something, you'll say, okay, wait a minute, we're thinking we're going to charge $1,200 a month, but we notice the income is, $36,000 a year. Well, that's not going to, in that surrounding area. You really have to make sure that that income in that area can support the rent, and look at that. Also, you're looking generally for income that's greater than 50,000, which I would say even in this day and age, maybe that would get a little bit tough. But it also depends on the kind of asset you're getting into. Typically, we're looking at B and C assets. So if you get too low, you're starting to get into like a D sort of asset. The thing I mentioned also earlier was the ability to add value, meaning that can the operators look at a deal and say, okay, you know what? I think if we refresh these units, make them more appealing, they're very dated at this point, we could probably bump rent, whatever that is, and then kind of come up from there and just see how we can improve value. Another key indicator and something that we look at is asset vintage, meaning if it's 1980 and newer, it's generally insurance is cheaper. You won't have as much maintenance, just things that you don't have to go around as much and work through. So it's just much easier if you work with a newer asset. The other thing is, are looking at an asset that maybe is just underperforming? It's not managed well currently, or there's been deferred maintenance or anything like that. And you know that if you get in there and get that asset, you can put the right property manager in place, and then you can get that maintenance done, which will ultimately, maybe you can increase rents and then bring in that net operating income, which obviously increases the value. So I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer now, and she is going to walk through an example.
Yeah, so this is a property that we went full cycle on. We only owned it for 2 years. And something that Debbie brought up was class types. She mentioned Bs and Cs. So when we're thinking about all the brand new builds out there, those are considered Class A structures. So this is an older asset here. As you can tell by the pictures, this is what you would call a Class C property. And it's typically called a Class C based on the age of the asset. Now, this one is actually a 1988. And when I first looked at it, I could have sworn it was a 1960 or 1970 build. It just looks really dated. But before we even looked at the asset, though, we really wanted to dig in deeper on the actual market that it resides in. So it's in Greensboro, North Carolina, which has seen a huge influx of migration, especially during COVID. So many people were moving to the Carolina areas. So we really like that. And because of all the migration, rents were climbing pretty quickly there. So this asset, just looking at the market, it passed the litmus test. Now, when we're looking at we're zeroing in on the actual asset itself, we wanted to make sure that they had quick access to highways, which is the fourth bullet point down there. We had, quick access to that. Also, our residents want access to stores that you and I shop at. So they want quick access to Target and Lowe's and Walmart and those kind of stores, which it had. You'll also notice that it doesn't have a second story to it. So it was a very charming community that allowed you to walk straight into the unit, and it felt like home. It was set in a park-like setting with all these huge, massive trees. And so it was a very inviting property, even though it had an old exterior look to it. And the best part is, well, there's two really good things to note here. The very first bullet point says, we got this at $60,000 a door versus in the area, the other assets in the area that were comparable to this were trading at $80,000 to $100,000 a door. So when we talk about how much is it per door, it's kind of like saying, how much do you pay for your home that you live in? What's your door cost you? And so you think about what's the cost to get into a single family home for somebody that's buying their very first home. There's no way they could get into their very first home at $60,000. Even getting into a home at 80 to 100,000 is really challenging to do. Now you can do it in tertiary markets, but in big markets where we're looking for big employers to be that are going to provide jobs for our residents, it's very difficult to buy a single family home at this price. So we felt very fortunate to get something so inexpensive. And the other thing we really loved, and you can't tell by these pictures here, but 1.63 million had been infused by the previous owner into the interior units. And so if you'll advance, Debbie, we'll take a look at the next slide and look at the pictures. So you can see these are some remodeled units here. We had budgeted personally $800,000 in capital expenditures. So the goal was, and something we did, and the way we come up with our budget is once we get a purchase sale agreement, which is called a PSA, signed, and that's just an agreement on the price that we're going to buy the property at, we then show up and we have 1 month to do our due diligence. And during that due diligence time, we will walk the entire property. We will note every single thing that we see that we need to address financially. We then also walk every single interior unit. We note the condition of all the appliances, as well as the hot water heaters. We look at gutters on the exterior. We look at windows. We look at AC units. We look at all of that stuff, and that's how we come up with a capital expenditure budget. So in the case of this property, we noticed that we needed to replace all the roofs. The interior units had been renovated, but there were still a few that we still needed to take care of. We had siding repair and paint to take care of. We had parking lot repair and ground cleanup because those trees were massive and they were hanging over the apartment. And we literally had trees, little tree sprouts growing up out of the gutters. And then we had railing and fence repair to do. So every single unit had its own little patio with wood fencing. But again, we had little sprouts of trees growing out of the top of our fences. So we knew that that was going to be something we were going to have to pay quite a bit of money for, but that it would really enhance the property. So our rent strategy was taking the rent from 671 all the way up to 843, which we did in 2 years. So the thing that I want to really express here is what that does to the valuation of the property. So if you take $843.98 and you subtract $671, you get a difference of $172. So we made that bump over 2 years. So if you divide that by 2, you get somewhere about 80-ish dollars per year is what we bump the rent. Now, let's take 172. If any of you have a calculator, this is a great time to learn how we do math on this asset. So if you take $172.48 and you take that times 12 months, 172.48 times 12 months times 130 units, you get an increase of $269,068. Now, this is what's really cool. If you think about a single family home, if you were to increase the rents over 2 years, $172, your valuation of your property is not going to go up by $268,000. Probably not. Okay. It's really, you just increased your net operating income on your single family home about $172. It's the difference between the two numbers. But here, the difference is on a multifamily is you've got all those doors that also got that increase. And then you take that times 12 months. And now the difference between single family and multifamily is everything's valued on a cap rate, which means we divide this number by the going cap rate on this type of asset. So, and it depends on the market you live in. So for this particular market, Class C, in this area, we were, the cap rate was 6%. So if you divide that number by 0.06, that just added $4,484,000 in value to this asset. Now, there are expenses. You could divide that number by an expense ratio of 50%. So let's just say, on average, every dollar we take in, half of it goes to pay expenses, right? Like insurance, property taxes, payroll, management, contract services like lawn mowing, all those different things, turning the units, make ready expenses. That's a 50% expense ratio. So just divide that number by 2. We added $2,242,000 to the value of this asset just by increasing rents $80, approximately $80 each year. Now, as a limited partner, you get to participate in that increase in value. And that is why so many people love to invest in multifamily assets, because you cannot get that increase in your income or your net worth by investing in a single family. And you can do this over and over and over. So something I like to encourage my friends and family, something my husband and I do, is we try to invest in 3 apartment buildings a year. And so every 3 to 5 years, these things are turning and our net worth is going like this slowly. It's not a sprint, but it is a marathon. And if you do this consecutively year over year, you're going to see a huge change in your net worth. So the last part of this is rebranding of an apartment complex. So let's look at the next slide.
Sure.
And you can see that we changed the look of this pretty substantially. You can see we have brand new roofs. It's hard to see in that picture, but we put on all brand new roofs, new guttering. We also changed the color. We gave it a new name. So we named it 3237 East. And we have new fences around all the patios. We, enhanced our landscaping package. So we cleaned it up. Just overall, it's a really attractive asset. So when we bought this asset, it was the lowest in terms of rating in a CoStar report, which is a report that's put out for all the apartments in the area in which your property resides. And we went from being at the last for this class to the top rank. And we did that in 2 years. So you can see pro forma is another word for projection. So on the left side of the screen here, in that left box, we were projecting to sell this in 5 years at 11,641,000 with an average cash on cash return annually of 8.11, an IRR, which is your internal rate of return of 14.88, and an AAR of 16.68. And those are pre-tax numbers. So whenever you're looking at numbers, keep in mind that the numbers people are sharing with you are pre-tax, because we don't know what your individual situation is. So, but on the sales side, we sold this 25 months later. Our sale price was $11 million. The average cash on cash was 7.02. The IRR was 10.5. But the AAR, this is your annualized average return. So it takes into consideration all the distributions, the profit at the end. And when you annualize that over 2 years, the return to all of our investors was 15.49, and that's after tax. So we were in a situation, we didn't know if we wanted to sell the asset. But as you know, they always have the saying, bird in hand is better than two in the bush. And we felt like we had seen so much over the last few years with COVID and spike in interest rates, inflation going through the roof. We felt like we had a good buyer. So we took advantage of that and went ahead and sold the property. Looking back, I don't know if it was, I mean, you can always look back and question, but I think in the end, it was still the right decision. And Jane is nodding. Yes, that was a good decision. She was an investor in this deal. So glad to hear that you agree with that. Okay, if you want to advance.
Sure.
So there are 2 types of regulations we follow. This is a very regulated industry by the SEC, and it has 2 different offerings in multifamily. One is called a 506B and the other is a 506C. So anything that you see that's advertised publicly through LinkedIn or different media sites, those are what you call 506C. Those are crowdfunding offers. It's available to anybody that's an accredited investor. And I'll share with what accredited investor is. Most offerings, though, that Debbie and I will be bringing to you all, and that's a 506B offering. And that's what we also call a friends and family offering, because we have to know you for you to participate in the deal. And in that type of a scenario, we can take up to 35 sophisticated investors and then is unlimited amount of accredited. And the difference between sophisticated and accredited investor is a sophisticated investor doesn't have as much investing experience. They're a little newer of an investor, and they don't have the net worth that an accredited investor does. So to be considered an accredited investor, you have to have made $200,000 in 2 consecutive calendar years, or with your spouse, $300,000 in 2 consecutive calendar years, or a net worth of $1 million excluding your primary residence. So if you meet those, you can invest in any offering that you see that's publicly advertised. But primarily the ones that we're going to be bringing you will be 506B offerings. So the investment process, we will invite you to a webinar just like this one, and we will share exactly similar slides to what I showed you on the Village at Rankin. We'll walk through what we found during our due diligence, the CapEx budget. We will show you what we believe are our projections for our returns to you, the investor. And then we'll also talk about our hold time and what we plan to do, what our business plan is. The second piece of this is once you've listened to the webinar, we'll invite you to our portal where you can go on and review all the documents. And then the third part is you sign the documents. Going back to reviewing the documents, it's really important, though, that you take the time, if it's your very first investment, to read through it. You need a big cup of, or a big pot of coffee. It is about 150 pages, but it allows you to get familiar with the document itself. You want to make sure that you understand it to the best of your ability. And if you have questions, you should ask your sponsor, such as Debbie or myself. But then just know that there's risk involved in every investment, whether it's this type of an investment or you're investing on the New York Stock Exchange, whatever you're doing, this is no different. It does have risk involved, and it's important that you understand that and that you feel comfortable investing in this, because it's not something that you can put money in and then decide 6 months later, ooh, you're nervous, you don't like where the market's going, you're going to pull out. Once you put the money in, we're operating it like a business. And so you don't have the ability to pull your funds out. So once you put your money in, it stays in it through the entire duration of the hold time. And then you'll just sign the documents through the application that we have. And you'll want to wire your money after you sign your documents. And it's that simple. Now, after we purchase the property, that's where the general partner team, such as myself and Debbie, we go to work for you and we start implementing our business plan. We meet with our property management company that we will have on site, and we give them specific duties in terms of what we want done on the property. We make timelines. We also manage the collections, the vacancies. There's usually a little bit of turnover that happens at the property as you're raising rents and you're starting to really lock down on not giving people 30 days to pay their rent, but instead you're holding them to, they have 5 days to pay their rent. And if they don't, they're getting a 3-day notice. So that's something that we're very actively engaged in. And then the thing that you get to participate in is the distributions. So we will start paying those distributions as early as possible. On many of our assets, we start paying out as early as 6 or 7 months. So it all depends on the business plan that is set forth on the property. And every single property is a little bit different. We have a property that we're bringing to market here in a couple weeks, and it will cash flow day one as is, but we're going into that property and we're going to be doing a lot of renovations and taking it to an A-class property. So we don't anticipate that it'll even stabilize until month 7. So that's just something for you to be aware of, that when you're attending these webinars, it's really important for you to understand the business plan. So at maybe 15 months into it, you're not panicked because you haven't received a distribution. Keep in mind that every single asset is a little different. And then the last part of the thing that we do for you is we take it full cycle, and then we return your capital to you, and then along with the profit. The most ideal situation, though, is one that we invest in that we call a legacy asset. And this is a property that we've identified that we want to own maybe a little longer than 5 years. Maybe it's an asset we want to own long term. And the goal in that case is we would refinance the property in maybe year 3 or 5 and return as much capital and equity to you, the investor, and then you retain ownership in that asset. That's in single family, what we call a BRRRR strategy, where you buy it, you rehab it, you rent it out, and then you refinance with the goal to limit as much money in the asset as possible. And that's where you get to start using the same dollar on multiple assets. So I've done this. We just got done refinancing a property in Atlanta last year, and we were able to get a portion of that capital back. And then I took that capital and I invested it in another asset that we purchased shortly thereafter. So my dollar is now invested in an Atlanta property, and it's also invested in a Savannah property, the same dollar. And so I have ownership in both assets now. Now, if you used your life insurance policy to purchase that initial investment, you're actually using your money 3 different ways, because now you have an asset in life insurance where you're growing a death benefit, and then you're also got it invested in a property in Atlanta, and then you're pulling it and using that same dollar to invest in Savannah. So that's where infinite banking, that whole concept comes in, and that's where it gets really fun in real estate. So we will probably have a future conversation like that on a future webinar that Debbie and I do. So I'll bring that to you later. But for now, just know that most of the holds that we do, or most of the properties we invest in, have a hold time of 3 to 7 years. And then ways to fund it. So obviously you can use your savings. A lot of people don't know this, but you can use your own IRA. So I have a finance degree. I didn't learn that you can invest your IRA in real estate until I was in my 40s. And I felt like I had just didn't get a good education. I was just so taken back by that comment, because I had asked my financial advisor for years, can I invest in real estate? And he kept saying no. And then when I heard at the Rich Dad program that you just have to find a qualified custodian to do it on your behalf, that was a game changer. So we used to be 100% in the stock market. Now we're 90% in real estate and only 10% in the stock market. So we really switched the way we invest. You can also use a home equity line of credit. You can sell other investments. And then there's the life insurance piece, which is really valuable as well. And then there's the last part here, performing your own due diligence. So obviously we're going to do due diligence on the asset and on the market at large, but it's your responsibility to do your own homework on the sponsorship team. And you want to make sure you understand the risk tolerance. You also want to make sure, again, that you understand you're not going to be able to use your funds for 3 to 7 years. There is a potential that the property will be mismanaged. And so that's why it's really important that you look at the syndication team and who is putting the deal together. So the syndication team analysis. I basically already said that it's really important for you to look at the sponsorship team. And one of the things I would encourage each of you to ask whenever you're considering an opportunity is ask them, what is their team track record? Have they went full cycle on a deal? Because that's really important. And then another question is, you want to ask the team, is everybody putting their own money in the deal? And if they're not, you need to understand why they're not. Maybe they're just getting started, or maybe their funds are tied up, but it's really important to understand why they're not putting their own money in their deal. That shows a lot of how strong the property is, in my opinion. You also want to make sure you understand what their assumptions are when they were underwriting the property. So did they write, for example, do they have reserves for 6 months on the property while they're renovating it? So you want to make sure you have 6 months of expenses and 6 months of mortgage payments set aside. Not all operators do that. You also want to look at, did they do a sensitivity analysis? Meaning when you're remodeling and renovating the property, how far can it fall in occupancy before you can't make your mortgage payment anymore? So those kind of things are really important to look at. Also, how fast are they growing their rent assumptions? And how fast are they growing the expenses at the property? If they're only growing expenses 1%, that's not enough. You and I both know inflation is I think it's 7%, or it was. Now it's slowed down and we're in a better environment today. But if you didn't underwrite to growing expenses of at least 3%, you're behind the ball. So what are your operating reserve assumptions? And then, has the sponsorship team ever lost an asset? Has the bank ever taken something back? And if so, you need to understand why. What happened in that scenario? So I do know of some operators that have lost their properties during COVID, and it's just unfortunate. The timing just couldn't have been worse for them. And they lived in a state where their tenants were not required to pay their rent. And eventually they couldn't stomach the payments. They were funding it out of their own pockets, and eventually they ran out of their own money. So those things happen, and you just need to understand why they lost the property. But these are just some basic questions for you to ask your sponsorship team if you are looking at anything that is that's not brought to you by Debbie or I. And then this is just a great quote we like. The rich don't work for their money. They make their money work for them. And that's why we like multifamily, is you can see how the money is working for us. And by the valuation that we did on the calculator, how you can see by increasing your rent just a little bit, how it makes an exponential difference in the valuation. And then I'm going to turn it over to you, Debbie, to bring us home.
Awesome. Well, great. Thank you so much. And no, just to say really quick, I think if you take away anything, that it's just if you ever consider this and do this, really make sure that you have the right to ask all those questions. And even if they're hard questions, because it is your money, you've worked hard for it. And so I would just impart that is that you do have that to ask those questions. Jennifer and I are going to do future topics related to this. We're going to be doing one on the market analysis, like what areas are good, what areas we like, and why, because there's a lot that goes into play there. We'll go through a real life study, like soup to nuts. Then we'll walk through like a due diligence period and what everything that you look at there and the important steps that you need to take during that. And then we'll also walk through asset management. It's not just tenants. I mean, there is all sorts of things. You've got to take care of the taxes and the utilities and all those different things. So just really walking through that and what kind of KPIs and all that you look at. So, and if anyone has another topic or anything that they would like to let us know, we'll definitely incorporate it and talk through it. So, yeah. And then I just truly wanted to say thank you so much for joining us today. I enjoy it as always talking about this stuff, and hopefully it'll give you a little bit of information related to it. So wanted to see, I know we're we've been almost at it an hour. I don't know if there are any questions.
Anybody have any questions?
I do. You said on multifamily, you guys do less per unit. What is that on generally like on a breakdown? You said like generally like a house is like 100,000. So what would an apartment be?
Yeah, so it depends on the area. In the example that I showed a little bit ago, though, we purchased that property called Village at Rankin at $60,000 a door when the area was selling at 80 to $100,000 a door in apartment buildings. But every single area is different. We've bought assets for $130,000 a door, $250,000 a door. And you have to look at the rent. Is the rent going to be able to cover that mortgage payment and all those expenses? And if it doesn't, then you pass on the asset. Beth, did that answer your question?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Any other questions? No, everyone's just ready to end their day, huh?
Yeah,
Yeah.
probably.
Uh-huh. Yep.
Oh, we have two. Oh, what are the minimums for each
Oh,
investor? And does this vary? That's a great question. Debbie, do you want to answer it?
sure. It depends. It depends on the deal, obviously. But typically what you'll see is 50,000, sometimes 75, sometimes 100. I think I've seen 25 even, Jennifer. Um, but yeah, it really varies depending on the deal. And it does, so it does vary, yes.
Yeah. And I would just add on that if you're buying a $40 million asset, that the minimum's going to be higher. So that weighs a lot into how much we ask for as a minimum. And in an asset that costs $5 million, that's where you'll be able to get in probably for 25,000 to 50,000. So the smaller the asset, or typically the less you have to put in. And
Yeah,
then
that's
Tess just said, looking for hearing about future opportunities. So, well, I want to reiterate what Debbie said. Thank you all so much for being here this evening and taking time out of your evening to be here with us. We're really grateful for that. And we hope to see you on other webinars. And if you have any feedback on how we could have improved this or questions that you didn't ask, we'd like to hear from you. So please do not hesitate to let us know what those are.
yeah. Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you. You all have a wonderful evening. Take care.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.